Good morning. We're here reading about 10 minutes a day from the Anarchist Handbook, organized by Michael Malice. And today is episode 38, and we are starting in chapter 11, Benjamin R. Tucker, from State Socialism and Anarchism, How Far They Agree and Wherein They Differ, from the U.S. and A, written in 1888. And we're starting toward the top of page 142. So here we go. Probably no agitation has ever attained the magnitude, either in the number of its recruits or the area of its influence, which has been attained by modern socialism, and at the same time been so little understood and so misunderstood, not only by the hostile and indifferent, but by the friendly, and even by the great mass of its adherents themselves. This unfortunate and highly dangerous state of things is due partly to the fact that the human relationships which this movement, if anything so chaotic can be called a movement, aims to transform, involve no special class or classes, but literally all mankind. Partly to the fact that these relationships, must be the COVID, are infinitely more varied and complex in their nature than those with which any special reform has ever been called upon to deal, and partly to the fact that the great molding forces of society, the channels of information and enlightenment, are well nigh exclusively under the control of those whose immediate pecuniary interests are antagonistic to the bottom claim of socialism that labor should be put in possession of its own. Almost the only persons who may be said to comprehend even approximately the significance, principles, and purposes of socialism are the chief leaders of the extreme wings of the socialist forces, and perhaps a few of the money kings themselves. It is a subject of which it has lately become quite the fashion for preacher, professor, and penny a liner to treat, and for the most part woeful work they have made with it, exciting the derision and pity of those competent to judge. That those prominent in the intermediate socialistic divisions do not fully understand what they are about is evident from the positions they occupy. If they did, if they were consistent, logical thinkers, if they were what the French call consequent men, their reasoning faculties would long since have driven them to one extreme or another. For it is a curious fact that the two extremes of the vast army now under consideration, though united, has been hinted above by the common claim that labor shall be put in possession of its own, are more diametrically opposed to each other in their fundamental principles of social action and their methods of reaching the ends aimed at than either is to be their common enemy. Than either is to their common enemy, the existing society. They are based on two principles, the history of whose conflict is almost equivalent to the history of the world since man came into it, and all intermediate parties, including that of the upholders of the existing society, are based upon a compromise between them. It is clear, then, that any intelligent, deep-rooted opposition to the prevailing order of things must come from one or the other of these extremes. For anything from any other source, far from being revolutionary in character, could be only in the nature of such superficial modification as would be utterly unable to concentrate upon itself the degree of attention and interest now bestowed upon modern socialism. The two principles referred to are authority and liberty, and the names of the two schools of socialistic thought which fully and unreservedly represent one or the other of them are, respectively, state socialism and anarchism. Whoso knows what these two schools want and how they propose to get it understands the socialistic movement. For just as it has been said that there is no halfway house between Rome and reason, so it may be said that there is no halfway house between state socialism and anarchism. There are, in fact, two currents steadily flowing from the center of the socialistic forces which are concentrating them on the left and on the right. And if socialism is to prevail, it is among the possibilities that after this movement of separation has been completed and the existing order have been crushed out between the two camps, the ultimate and bitter conflict will be still to come. In that case, all the 8-hour men, all the trade unionists, all the knights of labor, all the land nationalizationists, all the greenbackers, and in short, all the members of the 1,001 different battalions belonging to the greater army of labor will have deserted their old posts, and these being arrayed on the one side and the other, the great battle will begin. What a final victory for the state socialists will mean, and what a final victory for the anarchists will mean, it is the purpose of this paper to briefly state. To do this intelligently, however, I must first describe the ground common to both, the features that make socialists of each of them. The economic principles of modern socialism are a logical deduction from the principle laid down by Adam Smith in the early chapters of his Wealth of Nations, namely, that labor is the true measure of price. But Adam Smith, after stating this principle most clearly and concisely, immediately abandoned all further consideration of it to devote himself to showing what actually does measure price, and how, therefore, wealth is at present distributed. Since his day, nearly all the political economists have followed his example by confining their function to the description of society as it is, in its industrial and commercial phases. Socialism, on the contrary, extends its function to the description of society as it should be, and the discovery of the means of making it what it should be. Half a century or more after Smith enunciated the principle above stated, socialism picked it up where he had dropped it, and in following it to its logical conclusions, made it the basis of a new economic philosophy. This seems to have been done independently by 3 different men of 3 different nationalities in 3 different languages. Josiah Warren, an American, Pierre G. Proudhon, a Frenchman, Karl Marx, a German Jew. That Warren and Proudhon arrived at their conclusions singly and unaided is certain, but whether Marx was not largely indebted to Proudhon for his economic ideas is questionable. However this may be, Marx's presentation of the ideas was in so many respects peculiarly his own that he is fairly entitled to the credit of originality. That the work of this interesting trio should have been done so nearly simultaneously would seem to indicate that socialism was in the air, and that the time was ripe and the conditions favorable for the appearance of this new school of thought. So far as priority of time is concerned, the credit seems to belong to Warren, the American, a fact which should be noted by the stump orators who are so fond of declaiming against socialism as an imported article. Of the purest revolutionary blood, too, this Warren, for he descended from the Warren who fell at Bunker Hill. From Smith's principle that labor is the true measure of price, or, as Warren phrased it, that cost is the proper limit of price, these 3 men made the following deductions: that the natural wage of labor is its product, that this wage, or product, is the only just source of income, leaving out, of course, gift, inheritance, etc. That all who derive income from any other source abstract it directly or indirectly from the natural and just wage of labor. That this abstracting process generally takes one of 3 forms: interest, rent, and profit. That these 3 constitute the trinity of usury and are simply different methods of levying tribute for the use of capital, that capital being simply stored up labor, which has already received its pay in full. Its use ought to be gratuitous, on the principle that labor is the only basis of price, that the lender of capital is entitled to its return intact and nothing more, that the only reason why the banker, the stockholder, the landlord, the manufacturer, and the merchant are able to extract usury from labor lies in the fact that they are backed by legal privilege or monopoly, and that the only way to secure labor the enjoyment of its entire product, or natural wages, is to strike down monopoly. It must not be inferred that either Warren, Proudhon, or Marx used exactly this phraseology, or followed exactly this line of thought, but it indicates definitely enough the fundamental ground taken by all three, and their substantial thought up to the limit to which they went in common. And lest I may be accused of stating the position and arguments of these men incorrectly, it may be well to say in advance that I have viewed them broadly, and that, for the purpose of sharp, vivid, and emphatic comparison and contrast, I have taken considerable liberty with their thought by rearranging it in an order, and often in a phraseology of my own. But I am satisfied, without in so doing misrepresenting them in any essential particular. And we'll go ahead and stop right there, about 2/3 of the way down on page 145. Again, reading from Michael Malice, the Michael Malice organized Anarchist Handbook, and from Benjamin Tucker from 1888 in the U.S. and we will be